Good afternoon
Yep.
and welcome to the Online Clinical Educators Forum, otherwise known as OCEF. I'm Dr. Amy Moy from the New England College of Optometry, and I'm the chair of the ASCO Clinical Affairs Committee, which is bringing you this forum through the support of the Clinic Directors Administrator SIG. Today's program will feature clinical teaching strategies with the use of artificial intelligence. We have a great lineup today, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our speaker, Dr. Laurah Turner from the University of Cincinnati, and our amazing panel of optometric faculty, which includes ASCO members Dr. Clinton Prestwich from CCO, Dr. Christina Esposito from AZCOPT, and Dr. Timothy Bossie from NECO, and they'll be highlighting their experiences implementing AI tools in clinical teaching. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Clinical Affairs Committee members, Dr. Andrew Archila, Dr. Don Goedde, Dr. David Hall, Dr. Basant Labib, Dr. Vakishan Nadarajah, and Dr. Candace Turner, as well as the SIG liaisons who serve on our committee. Thank you to this year's OCEF Chair, Dr. Don Goedde of OSU, and Vice Chair, Dr. Vakishan Nadarajah of CCO, who both volunteered to steer this program and effort. Thank you to our presenters who have taken time from their busy schedules to impart their wisdom with us today. Also, thanks to Ms. Jennifer Rubin, our Clinical Affairs Committee staff liaison at ASCO, and Ms. Molly Mills of ASCO for helping us behind the scenes today. Lastly, we want to thank our on-site OCEF liaisons for helping us spread the word at your campuses about this important program we have for you today. Just a few requests before we start. If you're watching as part of a group, please make sure that you have each attendee sign an attendance sheet and send the final sheet to Jennifer Rubin at ASCO. Please take a moment to double check that you are on mute. Please remain on mute through the duration of the event, and we'll be accepting questions in the chat during our Q&A portions of the program. Please keep your camera on if you're presenting or if you're a moderator. This meeting will be recorded for posting on ASCO's YouTube channel, which can be found on the ASCO website. Ms. Rubin will send a SurveyMonkey link to each registrant shortly after the conclusion of the program. Please complete this survey so that we can utilize the information for future planning. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Don Goedde to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you so much for the background, Dr. Moy, and for the housekeeping notes. I would just like to add that you can put your questions in the chat at any time, and we will do our best to answer them by the end of the presentation or later in a summary. And now on to our forum. We have a wonderful speaker today, Dr. Laurah Turner. Dr. Turner is the Assistant Dean for Assessment and Evaluation at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. She is passionate about creating systems of change through inventive data collection and analysis, fostering innovation in the field of medical education. Dr. Turner has her Doctor of Philosophy in Biomedical Anthropology, from Indiana University Bloomington, and she advocates for social justice and education, continuously seeking innovative ways to drive impactful change. Dr. Turner, thank you so much for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. We've been doing some workshops for faculty throughout the healthcare profession, education for how to use artificial intelligence for a while now, and it's always very interesting. I learn something every time I give this talk or any variation of it. So I'm really excited to see what ideas you all come up with today. Let's see. Perfect. So the title of my talk is Applied Intelligence. We are really going to be talking about how do we integrate these different types of technology, really kind of at a foundational level. The lab that I have, which is called Two Sigma Labs out of the University of Cincinnati, develop very kind of sophisticated tools for actualizing precision medical education, because I'm in the College of Medicine. But what we're going to be talking about today, anyone can do. You don't need any coding background. You don't really need any background in artificial intelligence, although we will go over a couple of basics so that we can all be on the same page, talking the same language. So here are our learning objectives today. So I hope that by the end of this session, you will be able to apply some fundamental characteristics of generative AI and understand more of what we call its probabilistic nature. If you haven't heard that term before, don't worry, we will go through it. I hope that you will be able to evaluate some good environments, some good use cases in your own educational environment. Apply some prompt engineering techniques to create some meaningful educational tools or help you in your work. And then also brainstorm at least one educational resource, maybe a case study, maybe an idea for an assessment, something that you can start to implement immediately. So just for full conflicts, I don't have much in here that is relevant, but I do have a bunch of funding from different associations, and we have a few patents out of my lab. Oh, that's interesting that looks like that. Okay, so I'm guessing that everybody has heard of ChatGPT, and if you haven't, you've probably been under a rock. And there's a lot of interesting conversations. I was just in Barcelona for a big conference about what that means for the future of healthcare professions, whether or not that AI would be replacing jobs, what types of jobs would be replaced. And, I think that what we're really understanding now is while maybe AI in terms of large language models and agents may be able to do some really cool things, it's not going to replace doctors or optometrists or many of the healthcare profession jobs yet. However, even though that may not happen, humans that can use AI will probably replace those humans who are not able to use AI very well. So this is why this is important. So let's talk a minute about what is generative artificial intelligence. So generative AI is just as it sounds. It is a type of artificial intelligence that creates or generates images, sometimes audio, text, as though it was written by a human. And what is interesting, though, is it is trained on these huge corpuses of data. So think everything on the internet, all of the best and the worst of humanity out of Reddit, Facebook, YouTube, etc. So it uses all of these to detect patterns. That's why it can generate text or essays as though it was written by a human. But it's not really creating something differently than how humans do. Instead, it's taking these patterns and reusing what it already has been exposed to in its training. It's not generating something new, it's increasingly putting together these pieces in ways that we have never been able to do before. So it really just looks like what it has already been trained on. If you've been to a lot of conferences and heard about AI, you may have recently, over the past few years, seen lots of generated images with lots of blue lights, right? And holographic displays. That's not because that's what the future is going to actually look like, but instead, historically, what humans thought the future would look like. And AI has been trained on this. So let's break it down into some just fundamental tidbits that we can all understand, right? So if we take large language models, which are kind of the most ubiquitous generative AI tools in use right now, we can see that it could create this sentence, right? The promise of a large language model is that they. And then it would have to come up with new words. But what happens is a large language model doesn't read this sentence as though you and I would read it. It's not looking at every word, looking for meaning, but instead it's breaking up every word or every section of words or every combination of words, also called a token, into numbers, right? So you see that there, 464, 6991, 288, right? That is how an AI reads. Not the way we do, but instead with probability. it is predicting the most next likely word. So if we take this into kind of an example, and I said to all of you to be or, everyone on this call probably finished that sentence with not to be. Not, and that's really what a large language model does, what you and I just did. We know not to be is supposed to come after because we have been exposed to it over our lifetime so many times. And this is also what the AI does. But if you look at what comes after that, and you ask a large language model to finish that sentence 3 different times, while you always get not to be first, you also get several different iterations. This is because it's probabilistic. It is searching for what comes next. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter, right? And you can see that here. It knows exactly what it should say because it's been exposed to that Shakespearean phrase so many times. But what happens if we give it something that it is not as familiar with, that maybe didn't appear in its training? So if we ask it, the Martian ate a banana because, you can see here, if we ask 3 different times, we'll get 3 different answers. It reminded him of home. It was curious about earthly flavors and thought it was an advanced form of technology. It had read that bananas were the perfect food, right? All of it seems internally consistent, but it's completely made up. Because what's happening is the large language model is searching for what feels right, but it doesn't know how to find it because that information never appeared in its training data before. So a different way to think about this, and we're actually writing this paper right now, hopefully it'll come out in a few months, is if we look at large language models or any type of generative AI, it follows what's called a 1/x decay distribution. Now, we're not going to talk about a ton of math because it frankly just makes people's eyes roll back in their head. But this is really useful in kind of thinking about different times that AI has a good use, where it may need a human in the loop or a human co-pilot, or maybe when humans should just do the job, right? And so if we think about this and look at this graph, the x-axis is going to represent knowledge complexity, right? Or the representation in the training data, how frequently something occurred. So over to the left-hand side would be where something occurred very frequently in the training data. And over to the right-hand side, it would be very scarce, or something that was very complex in knowledge, right? Because that also makes sense that if something's really complex, it's probably not going to show up that often in training data. The y-axis represents how well the model does on any specific tasks, right? So model performance. Does it get the answer right all the time? Is it factual? And so the higher up on there, the better the performance. The lower, the worse the performance. And so we can actually take this and look at basically 3 different sections. We have over to the far left, the AI reliable zone. In this zone, the large language model would be like really excel. It has lots of training data and training examples to pull from. It's very consistent in its performance. It's stable and it can be trusted. However, as knowledge complexity gets a little bit more complicated, or representation in the training data goes down, we kind of enter this zone of inflection. And here, the AI can still be useful if it's used as the co-pilot, not the pilot. And as we move further along and we see that long tail, that's what's called the decaying tail of the 1/x decay distribution, this is the area where performance just falls off a cliff, right? It might be where you're talking about very rare optometry cases that hardly anyone has seen before, or maybe they're really complex. A patient comes in with a lot of comorbidities. And so this is where, it's unstable. There's a lot of risk for what we call hallucination or unfactual, ungrounded outputs. And really, it should not be used. Okay, so if we take a moment and we think about then, if we know that in more common cases, in areas that may be frequent in the training data set, the AI is going to do very well. And then we have the opposite. We can move on to the question of, when is AI a good tool in optometry education? Now, this is borrowed from Ethan Mollick. If you're not familiar with him, you should look him up. He's out of Harvard and does a really good job on breaking down kind of use cases for AI in a general sense. And, there's a lot of different times that he kind of buckets or categorizes use cases in his book, but these four I thought were particularly relevant here. In content creation and enhancement, so for first drafts or for brainstorming, when you need style or tone adjustment, right? Create this worksheet, but have it be the level of a 10-year-old, right? Maybe you're creating handouts on how to, for a first-time user of contacts, or research synthesis, right? Another one would be augmenting experience. So adapting learning materials to different audiences, maybe different levels of learners. Work that contains some element that you can understand, but you need help with the context or detailed, right? Because you're the expert. So if you are generating some output, you can check it because you are the expert. Or work where you're expected to stretch your expertise widely over different disciplines, and where the alternative is good enough, right? Because you couldn't do it at all. I often use it as a second opinion or a resource, right? So if I generate, for example, an email, and I'm a little bit concerned about the tone, or I want to make sure that it comes across a certain way, I'll often use a large language model to help with that. Work where you need a first pass. So again, you might want that tone to be adjusted for you. Or when AI is good enough, right? So I did this workshop at OSU a few months ago, and we talked about times when work was the mere ritual and it had been long severed from its purpose, right? So what we mean by that is generating reports that nobody reads, but you have to do it, and they're very standardized, and it's a great use case. Repetitive tasks that humans shouldn't need to do. Really good use case for AI. And then work that involves summarization of large amounts of information. This is a wonderful use case, especially for a large language model. You may all be familiar with the ambient scribes. They are being deployed widely in medicine right now. And what these do is it sits on your phone. You can download an app, and you hit the go button, and it records the patient encounter, and then it generates the note that is stored in the electronic health record afterward. And it's a really good use case because large language models are designed wonderfully to do this. It also solves a problem. One, the physician can look at the patient and not have to be staring at a computer screen the entire time. And note writing is tasky. Physicians are busy, as all are you. And so this solves that problem by structuring all of that information into a note for them. And I've gone around and I've been fortunate enough to speak at many medical schools and actually many different types of schools, from veterinary to optometry. And when I've asked about ambient scribes, I've asked many different, physicians or practitioners in different stages of their lives, and even kind of the older, non-technical, kind of set in their way individuals. And I asked them, I'm like, well, do you use it? Do you like it? And they're like, well, it doesn't really do it exactly the way I would do it. And I would do it this way. And I'm like, oh, so you don't use it. And they're like, oh, no, 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 no. I would never go back because it solves a problem. And so these are really good use cases for AI. The key principles here are that you want to be able to use the AI when it can amplify your expertise, where you have the ability to fact check, to take a second pass, and to make sure, and where it's going to save you time on routine tasks. This allows you to focus more on the human element of educational interactions and provide that kind of high value for learners. Now, if there are really good times to use AI, of course, there's also going to be times when you should not use AI. So anytime you're going to be in a high stakes or safety critical situation, right? So direct patient care decisions, although this one is probably going to go away really soon. I don't know if anyone, and again, I know I give a lot of medical education examples because this is where I live. But out of Harvard, there's several randomized control studies that came out recently where they took a bunch of very seasoned physicians and gave them a bunch of cases that were very hard and had never been published on the internet before, so they were completely novel, and they asked them to solve them. They also then had another population of physicians, same thing, very seasoned, gave them the cases, but then also allowed them to use ChatGPT-4. And then a third grouping where it was just ChatGPT-4 alone. And not only did the humans plus AI perform way better than the humans alone, the AI outperformed humans plus AI. So this fundamental idea that humans plus AI is somewhat going to be, the best situation is actually being questioned by a lot of the research that's coming out. So anyway, but at this point in time, I'm going to say direct patient care decisions, probably not a good use for AI. Final grading and certification. Again, I'm guessing that, in a year or two, we may be taking this off this list. I know that a lot of the boarding organizations in medicine are looking into continuous certification using artificial intelligence, but we're not there yet. So any summative types of assessment. Anywhere privacy and compliance are involved, so any, PHI, any HIPAA stuff, you can't put that in a commercial large language model. If your institution has a HIPAA compliant large language model environment, go for it. And that's a wonderful thing. We've recently stood one up. But otherwise, if you're just interacting with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini via the web interface, you can't put any type of patient information in there. Likewise, for the same exact reasons, you can't put any confidential institutional data in there. You also probably shouldn't use AI when very high accuracy is required. Remember, these are probabilistic models, so they're looking for the most probable next word or phrase. Now, some of the reasoning models kind of deviate from that, but still, if something needs high accuracy, you might not want to do it, or you have to have a human check every single part of that output. Also, when AI is just bad, there are some cases that we know that AI is just horrible. For example, math. If you ask AI to count the number of R's in strawberry, it cannot do it. Now, some of the platforms have gotten around this by allowing it to have access to tools like Python code and stuff like that. But if you're just using a large language model and interacting, it does horribly with math. I built my daughter a math tutor because she's 9 and an AI is infinitely patient and I am not. And so she uses it. It's not allowed to tell her the answers or anything like that, but it also can't. And one reason for that is when she was using it, and this is good because I taught her, where the limitations are. Every single time it tries to give her an example and it generates the example, it never is actually correct, right? It can show her oh, this is how you do, 2-digit multiplication, but the actual output is never correct. And so there are quite, significant limitations with AI. Also, if you don't understand what those failure modes are, I would not use it, because it's really problematic. So we knew in the beginning that AI was really bad at citations and it would just make things up. But we also saw that with case law, and we've seen in the news lots of lawyers get in trouble for having AI write their briefs that were submitted to the court, and the court went up and looked up the case law, and lo and behold, it didn't exist because the AIs just made it up. So if you do not understand where the AI may fail, you should not be using AI for that particular purpose. It's also really not good for learning or synthesizing new ideas or information, right? So where the struggle is the purpose, there's actually been, and I wish I would have incorporated this into my deck, but I just learned about this study. There was this new study that came out that actually showed where your brain lit up when using AI for a task versus when you did not use AI for the same task. And you just don't like have the same deep learning that occurs. Those parts of your brain do not light up the same way. So I'll try to find that study and send it to Dawn, and she can distribute it if anyone is interested. But yeah, if the struggle or the purpose is to learn, then maybe AI is not going to be the best use case for that. Okay, so if we've talked about some good things and bad things. So if we're talking about optometry education, I can kind of think of like 3 really fast wins for faculty. Item drafting, right? So we've done this in medical education, right? So multiple choice question generation. It does a really good job. It can do plausible distractors. It can create rubrics. It can align it with learning objectives if you feed it there. One of the not failure, but one of the things that you should know is it does really, really good in the lower Bloom's taxonomy. Once you get into the higher Bloom's taxonomy, it takes a little bit of work. It's not going to, if you just ask it to generate questions, it's usually going to generate them in that lower Bloom's taxonomy range, right? So an example of this would be like create 3 items on, screening intervals with key distractors and rationales, right? OSCE checklists, we do a lot of that. We actually have built an entire system that generates AI clinical scenarios for our students to interact with, but you can easily just generate checklists. Standardized patient scenarios is another one that it does really good. Grading notes for clinical skills assessment stations too. We actually just built an agent that sits and watches recorded videos of OSCEs and scores it using our rubric, so we don't have to use as many humans anymore, and that allows us to get through it, and it's also more internally consistent than having many different humans grading. Patient handouts, really good use case. Generating educational materials, and then taking that and saying, hey, now recreate this at this reading level with multilingual support options. We know that most of the commercial large language models now can do a really good job across multiple languages. So just again, this is kind of my standard, like, yes, and be careful, HIPAA and FERPA. Data privacy is always going to be key. Verification, quality control. You have to have anything that it comes out with reviewed by a faculty before giving it to learners. Bias, we know that there are some biases that are baked into these large language models because they are trained on data that is generated by humans, and humans are biased. So large language models and AI will always have some biases in them. And then also accessibility and transparency. Just letting the end users know that AI is involved is really important. So there's a little snippet example of a syllabus kind of statement. This is not from me. I borrowed this from a colleague of mine up at Michigan. But generative AI may be used by the instructors for drafting learning materials, just kind of like putting that statement out there and making learners aware if you are going to be using AI. Okay, so one thing that I found to be particularly helpful for faculty is a kind of table here of all of the different types of large language models or flavors, I guess, from the different companies and what it's best for, right? So everybody's probably aware of OpenAI's ChatGPT. We are now on GPT-5, and then their highest reasoning model is O3. It has web access. It can generate image. It can do data analysis. It can do deep research. It even has this really cool agent mode now where you can tell it to like go off and do something on the internet for you, and it'll go do it while you're doing something else. It does a really good job with lit reviews. I remember, most of my professional life, whenever we had a new idea for a study, it would take us X amount of time, or I'd have to go find some medical student or fellow and go have them do a lit review to see if anyone had done this before or what areas it was done. Now we just have an agent that goes and does it for us and returns it with an annotated bibliography and, basically highlights all of the ones that we really should look at. And it really does a good job now. Several of the different AI services have that. There is Microsoft Copilot. I am, I will show my bias here. I think that it's kind of garbage. It's basically an earlier version of ChatGPT with a bunch of emojis. I don't think it's that great. But it is good for administrative tasks. So I will use it in my Outlook, especially when I'm traveling, which I do a lot. So I came back from Barcelona recently, and I just said, it knows me. Go and find any emails from these people, anything that has a task, and I want you to generate me a to-do list and prioritize it in this way. And this way I don't have to just sit there and sift through all of these emails. Instead, it helps with that. So Copilot can be useful for that. I don't find it very useful in any of the Microsoft applications like Word or PowerPoint or Excel. I think that there are other tools out there where that do a much better job. Google Gemini is fantastic. We are now up to Gemini 2.5 Pro. If you had asked me this like 9 months ago, I would have told you that it's pretty much worthless. But then Google somehow figured it out, and it is in competition for the best large language model. It does really cool things where it integrates with all the Google platforms. So it will, if you have it generate a spreadsheet for you, it will then export it to Sheets, and then you can download it as an Excel document. It's really useful. It has deep research. It's got something called a really long context. So you can put in tons and tons and tons of files and information to help give it context when you're asking about something, which we'll talk about in a second here, and it's really great for that. Anthropic is also another favorite of mine. In fact, Anthropic's Claude 4.1, Sonnet, or Opus, those are my daily drivers. If you're going to write, it's probably the best one. It doesn't sound like a large language model. I use it especially when I am writing papers and I'm stuck on a transition, or I want to make sure that my tone is consistent. It's really, really helpful. It also does deep research. It also does data analysis. I have to mention Grok, which is X's, which formerly was Twitter, AI's platform, just because it's there. It's not really great. I would recommend never using it or anything else by X, but that is up to you. Meta is Facebook's kind of parent company. They have the Llama series. These are fine. They're open source. The one key thing that is great about them is they can be run on premise, which means you can put patient data in there because you could create a HIPAA and FERPA protected environment. And then there's a couple others. Mistral is also one out of France. And then DeepSeek is the one out of China, which is also open source. It is pretty good. So this is helpful if you're just not aware of all of the different types of large language models and the services that are out there. Okay, so that was kind of a whirlwind background, but now I want to talk about some actual hands-on skills. How do we start to use these tools in a way to benefit us? So I think if we're starting, the first step is not how do I write a prompt? It's what is the task I want to achieve? And so The skill is how do you decompose that task so that you can figure out how to get to the output that you desire, right? So what is this? It's just breaking down complex tasks into clear components to create better AI prompts, right? So how do you do this? It has a couple of different steps. First, you're going to identify the very specific job that needs to be done, clarify required inputs and constraints, define expected outputs and formats, establish quality criteria and verification, and anticipate potential risks and have mitigation strategies, right? So how could we do this in optometry? Oh, I'm reading which one I have to hit. There we go. All right, so here's an example, right, of maybe a red eye OSCE station, right? And so again, full disclosure, not an optometrist, not even in this field. So I did have AI help me with these. So if they're wrong, I violated one of my rules as I cannot check them. So, but you can tell me and I will fix it for the next time. So the job to be done. So what's the job? The specific job is we want to create an OSCE station for evaluating a patient with red eye, right? The inputs we have various ones that we could put in. You could put in your course objectives. You definitely want to say what level, right? Or is this going to be for a third-year student? Is it going to be for continuous education? Is this who's this for? Then also, are there any time constraints? Is this an 8-minute station? Is it longer? What available equipment is going to be there? And so this is just a couple of examples. We go on and on and on, right? You could feed it in any documentation from professional organizations on competencies in this area. The list is endless. And then what do you want to come out of it? Well, you want the instructions for the student, right? You might want the SP script with all the history. You might want to have a checklist for the faculty who's going to be evaluating it. Maybe you want that, right? So what does that format look like? Oh, do you want it in a table? Do you want the evaluation to be binary scoring? Do you want it to be along a supervision scale or another type of scale, like a global rating scale? So you can do any type of that. And then what is the quality, right? You have to align it with course objectives. You could say it has to adhere to these clinical guidelines. Now, I would encourage you to play around with saying it has to adhere to these clinical guidelines, right? Insert clinical guidelines. And then also another version where then you actually give the clinical guidelines and see if it performs better. Sometimes it will. As the models get better, they said no some of the clinical guidelines. It needs to be clear, unambiguous scoring criteria, realistic presentations of conditions, and then thinking about like, where could this go wrong, right? Well, if it could generate an unrealistic clinical presentation. As we're getting better, this is not happening as much. The scoring system may be off. It might have, missing vital safety checks. It might not be that challenging. And so how would you mitigate that, right? The verification could be, cross-checking with clinical guidelines, faculty review before, doing a pilot test with some students or that are volunteers, et cetera. So there's all different ways you can do this. Now, it's easy for me to rush through this, but it's going to be harder to kind of remember this. So we have actually created a website that I'll ask. Thank you so much. So I'm going to drop this in the chat in just a minute here. But if you go over to the task decomposition canvas and push the button that says start decomposing, you will see that you actually can put all of this here and it will build you a prompt. So you can put in all of this information and it will start to build you a prompt. Now, I would tell you to not put in like the full, if you're going to put in a whole bunch of guidelines and things that are really long, I would reference them in here, right? Like I'm going to put in course objectives. Don't put the course objectives here. I'm going to put in this. And then once it generates it and you put it into say ChatGPT or whatever, then you can put in those additional resources. So here is the link for everyone to this. And we'll come back to this a couple of times because this kind of works as a cascade. You go first to the task decomposition canvas. And then as you see on that next button, it'll say build a raise prompt, and we'll go there next. So if we can go back to the slides, please. All right. So usually what we do is we spend a little bit of time letting people work on this a little bit, the job to be done, the inputs, the objectives. And so I will give everybody just a couple of minutes here. We're not going to do a lot because this is a webinar. But just as it's top of mind, we just drop that in the chat. You can go there, start playing around with it. And I want you to think to yourselves while you are playing around with this for the next, couple of minutes here. What inputs, what constraints or verification steps are you going to use? What's coming up in your head that would make that could really make optometry education, kind of unique or to the next level? So take just a minute or two, and we'll come back in just a second. Okay. So we're going to move on. That's why I wanted to make sure that everybody had that link so that they can see and use this for any time they want to in the coming, weeks or months or whatever. And then also these slides I will make sure have been shared and they can be distributed as well. So the next skill area that we really want to think about is now that we've decomposed the task at hand, how can we create a prompt? Because we're not going to just put that information into ChatGPT or into Gemini. And there's many different frameworks, and I used to go over all of them. I think it was a little bit too much. So this framework is the RAISE framework, and what RAISE stands for is Role, Audience, Inputs, Steps, and Evaluation. And it is a template that is used because it allows the consistent structuring of effective prompts, and it'll work well for optometry education too. So how does this work? When you think about the role, you have to define what you want the AI to do. You have to give it expertise, right? So you're an optometry educator creating a novel OSCE case for second year optometry students, right? So identify the specific role that you're, and then, kind of the context and the audience. So a lot of people get hung up on this step because they think that the role has to actually be real. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes I'll be like, you're an expert in writing, sensitive emails. Well, like some people don't necessarily focus or their expertise on that narrow of an area. However, what you're doing, remember, AI is a probabilistic model. So by saying you're an expert in X, Y, or Z, you're focusing the attention of the AI. Some of you, if you're familiar with a lot of kind of AI background, there's this very famous paper called Attention is All You Need. It doesn't have to do with this, but it's kind of the same concept. It's focusing the attention on the part of the training data that it most matters, right? If I just say, hey, generate an OSCE for me, well, when the AI output is generated, it has to consider everything in its training data, right? And so that includes Reddit and, Facebook and maybe things that we don't necessarily want it to have to consider in its probabilistic output. But instead, if we say you are an expert optometrist who excels in education, then it's narrowing that focus of all of its training data to be specifically targeted at that domain. So it is helpful. Audience, you always have to identify the audience, right? The learners for, whatever year of medical school or level of training for, what I do, or what level they are in optometry school, right? Or even if they're not in optometry school, maybe these are pre optometry students, or maybe they are actually practicing optometrists, and this is for continuing education. And then also, like, what is their prior knowledge or experience? Are these incoming students who have never been exposed to the clinical environment before, or are they like, they have had only experience with SPs but never actual patients? That's very important information to provide because it will impact the output that is generated. And then your input, you can do learning objectives, you can feed it any type of documentation. So any type of Word document, any type of PDFs, images, some can do video and audio. So anything that you have, PowerPoint presentations, all of that is really helpful if you have that information to guide the AI, because the more context or documentation you give it, the more grounded in that information the output will be. Now, sometimes that can backfire because you will give it too much and it will get rigid and only be within those bounds, and it will lose some of that creativity that large language models are known from. But you'll learn this as you start to do it. You can also point it to, because many of the AI services have access to the internet, you can actually just give it website links and say like, oh, well, here's our governing organization and, the core competencies for, our optometry students, like adhere to this. And then you do steps. So this is very similar to another prompting technique called chain of thought reasoning, which you may have heard, where you go step by step. And so if you do this, it actually helps the output or the model reason better. First, do this step, then do this step. And then you're actually ensuring that it goes through a process that would be similar to a human thinking, right? Instead of it just putting all of the output in there. So create, the stems. Each stem needs to have, 4 opportunities for answers. One of them needs to be the right answer, don't have any, also be partially right, or something like that, right? And we just got a question. The materials, the input that you will share with the I think it's supposed to be AI, will become public material. No, it will not. Anything that you put into that website, it doesn't even get stored anywhere. So like, if you like something that you generated, copy and paste it somewhere. This is like just a shell website that's supposed to be helpful. But no, that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking that. It does not get stored. It does not become public. I don't even have access to it. So it's truly just is kind of like a way to help with remembering how to do these steps and make it a little bit more interactive. Finally, the evaluation, the self-check and the quality criteria. This is really important, and there will be an extra step to this one too. So how are you going to verify this to make sure that it's safe, that it's accurate? Quality criteria, what standards does it have to meet? So in all of our tools, we do this in a lot of different ways. We have a red team made up of a lot of medical students, and when we build something, we just come and ask them to literally try to break it, and they do a fantastic job. But if you're generating outputs like assessment questions or rubrics, it's just reading through it and then having also someone take another pass and have another set of eyes on it. So if we want to go back to that website that we were at before, you can see now, if we go over one more tab to the right of the task canvas, we can see the raise prompt. Yep. And that's where you would input all of this. So if you are role, you can see, you can put in there, you know, teacher, and you'll see down where the prompt generation is, it's going to populate for you. And then when you're all done, you can hit copy that prompt, right? And then you can actually copy and paste it into chat GPT and then and use that. But again, if you create a prompt that you really like, then you probably want to save that, because if you navigate away from this website, it's gone forever. So I'll give you guys about 2 minutes to play around with this, and then we'll come back and we'll move on to evaluation. All right. So I hope that you guys got a chance to play around with that just a little bit. We will move on now to kind of a couple of different ideas that we have for actually creating different ones. And I created 3 different tracks for you all to try. So one would be an MBEO style item and rubric. And I gave you some example prompt templates for that assessment. And you can see there's a starter prompt at the bottom, right? So the role you could define is you're an optometry assessment specialist creating, you know, NBO style items. You can also say like you are specifically trained on, you know, item writing and blah, blah, and you've been doing it for 13 years or something like that. Like, as silly as those little things sound, it actually improves the quality of the output. The audience, whatever your learner level is going to be, you can put in different objectives for the assessment. You could put in the course objectives. You could put in the competencies, and then a list of specific tasks. So generate one item with key, have explanations for the options, and an analytic rubric. It's always a good idea to ask the AI along with the generated items to provide a rationale for why the correct answer that it's identifying as the correct answer is correct and why the others aren't. That's very helpful in your evaluation of it, right? What we have seen, especially early on when looking at our kind of version of NBEO, which is NBME, step 1, step 2 are the exams. You know, there's been a lot of papers written about how AI can pass step easily, or when it was given different items. And some studies were done, and even when the AI got the answer incorrect, if you ask the AI why it chose the answer, it provides an explanation. And then when that explanation was reviewed by physicians, there was a high percentage of time that the physicians go, oh, I see why I thought that. And so it's always just a really good idea. And it's always very helpful, at least to me, to ask the AI for its specific rationale or reasoning behind anything that it's generating. Then an evaluation criteria, self-check. I put here for verifying alignment to the objectives, obviously, stuff like that. And so there's your starter prompt down at the bottom. Key components you could add would be like one best answer format. We've fed the entire kind of like item writing guide for the NBME, which is National Board of Medical Examiners, to our question generator agent so that it knows exactly like how NBME wants us to write it, which has been really helpful also. Are there plausible distractors? Could be something else, etc. So that's one. And don't worry, you don't need to remember these because these are also all within the website as well. Track B would be an OSCE station, right? So we have question generation, OSCE station, and checklist. Very similar, right? Like here are some, starter prompts, some example things that you could do: refraction technique, slit lamp, visual field testing. And then those components, maybe you could have it do the SP script. Maybe you have it do station design, maybe an evaluation, checklist, etc. So that's track B, which you could do. And then the last one is a feedback assistant. This is also a really good use case. So you could do faculty coaching. We've developed an AI coach for reflective practice. It actually talks to student with voice. But this is, a much more basic version, which you can get started with, providing formative feedback. So, let's say a student writes a SOAP note, and then you de-identify them, right? It's a little tasky because you'd have to de-identify the student and then, paste it in, right? But that's probably more helpful than having to do it all by hand. Give it the rubric and then ask it to provide strengths and weaknesses, have it, identify 2 ways or 3 ways to improve, be very specific and actionable. And then also, again, ask it for its rationale. I would always do that. You could do this with SOAP notes. You could do this with case presentations, clinical documentation, educational materials and instruction. So there are a lot of different ways that you could do that as well. Let's see. That. Oh. All right. So here's going to be our practice. We're going to give a little bit more time for this. And then as you're going through, what I would love for people to do is to start putting this in, like putting kind of like what they did or any of their aha moments or anything like that in the chat so that we can kind of talk through some of this stuff as we're going. So as you go to the that website, you will see go ahead and click on it. You will see that the next one, the tracks, right next to the raise builder. Yep. You can click on any of those, track A, track B, track C. So if we just click on one, we can see here, there is a learner template. You can actually go in and paste in that rubric criteria. You could just copy that and put it into whatever large language model of choice. So I would suggest picking one. Maybe you go to ChatGPT. Maybe if you have always used ChatGPT, try a different one. Try Gemini, which is Google's. Try Anthropic's Claude. I will copy and paste some of those links in there if you are interested in that. And then I will start looking at kind of the chat and in a couple of seconds after I paste these websites in there and talking about like what are you guys finding and what questions do you have? So I'm going to give it a second for you guys to get started, and I'm going to paste some of these links in. All right, so I see a couple of questions that are coming in on how do we input documents or references. And then I think that's and just some other ones that are coming in. So the ones that are a little bit more logistics, I'm going to handle first. So let's see how we can do this. So I am going to ask Amy to open a new tab and just put in, go ahead and click on the, go to ChatGPT or Claude.ai, whichever one. All right. So right now we are on ChatGPT. I'm assuming that we are on the free version of this. There are multiple tiers. You can pay $20 a month. You can pay $200 a month, or you can just do it for free. So what's really cool about this now is you see that little plus sign there that is right next to Ask Anything. This is where you can you can add files. So you can add any type of PDFs, any Word documents, any PowerPoints. You can, if you go to more, I believe it's, or is it? So web search, if you hit that web search button, you can just dump in any type of just links in general. So you can just point it to a website. Or you can take it off. It will encourage it. If you leave it on, it'll encourage it to go to the web. So if you don't want it going to the web, you can turn it off. That is how you dump in different documents into there. So you can do anything that you want with that. All right. So then another question that we got was under input references, examples of references. Would we specify a book or articles? So if you're gonna, you don't want to just specify, because you can't assume that the large language model knows the book or the article that you're talking about. You can provide a link where it can go and access. You want it to have access to the entire thing, because what it's going to do is it's going to read it all, and then it's going to base its output on that. So you don't want to just assume it knows that. Yes, it knows Hamlet, but like, is it going to know like whatever the governing organization of optometry's competencies are? Maybe. Like, it's very possible it might, but it's possible it might not. You might just ask it to say, to test it, like list out the, competencies or whatever. Otherwise, you would feed it in as a PDF, or if you have summaries of it, you would feed it in that way. Textbooks, you also can feed in. The problem that you're going to run into, however, with a lot of textbooks is going to be something called context windows and context limitations. So and what do we mean by that? It's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but it's a very simple, it's actually very simple. So if you imagine the amount of words or texts or, things that you can put into a conversation is the size of, a fishbowl, right? So it's a very specific sized container. And you start pouring water in, and water is like the words that you've, put in there, where you put in the prompt, or you put in a book, or you put in articles or PDFs. If that's like water, if you keep pouring water into that fishbowl, eventually when it gets filled, the water runs over, and that water is no longer in the fishbowl. The same thing happens with the words, only it goes in order. And so basically, if there's this much room in the context window, every single time you put new information in, that context window goes down, and the information that was up here disappears. And in the conversation, it no longer remembers that. It's called the vanishing gradient, which is just a fancy word of like, it forgets the things at the beginning of the conversation because it's outside the container size, right? It fell out. And so if you notice, right, and there's no way to know when this is, like, it's not like, oh, you've reached your limit. No one tells you that. But what you'll notice is like, it'll kind of lose the thread of the conversation. Or actually, I actually made a mistake. That's not true. Anthropic's Claude, which this is another reason why I love Anthropic, it will actually tell you. It will say, oh, like, you're kind of reaching the limit of this. Like, you may want to start a new chat. that means you've reached the limit of your context window. Now some of them have gotten really big. Like Gemini's context window is like ridiculously big. Like you could put like hundreds of books in there and not fill it up. So probably safe. Anthropics is a little bit smaller. ChatGPT's is pretty big now, but it's limited on how much you pay. So those people who pay $200 a month have bigger context window sizes than those who pay less. So I hope that is helpful. Oh, I see we have some in the question and answer. I might have missed it, but how does the task decomposition tab inform the raise tab? So you should be able to push a little button, and I hope it's still working. It was working before we started this. And it should like go back and populate. So if you go into that first one in the decomposition one, yep. Sorry, the second tab. Yep. See, it says next build a raise prompt. It should auto populate some of that information in there. But really it's just, these really are thought exercises. What we tried to do, and it's not just me, a bunch of people who work on these things. So there's Jesse Burke-Raffel from NYU. We try to think about like the thought process we go through with prompt engineering and how we do it. And then that informed these, some of these tools. And so it's just kind of like what we do on a regular basis. So if like the task decomposition doesn't directly populate everything in the next tab, but it's like the first, thought exercise to be able to write a good prompt, if that makes sense. Then when dumping in files, how do you prevent the references from becoming part of the large language model training? So that's an interesting question. So if you're using closed source models or commercially available models like ChatGPT or Claude, there is a toggle in like the profile where you can say, don't use this information to train on. Right. And here's the thing. What I've noticed is every time I hit that toggle in ChatGPT, I come back 2 days later and that toggle's back on. So like, this is why we say don't put, sensitive information. So if like you have this brilliant idea or this amazing paper that you're writing and you're concerned for some reason that OpenAI is going to steal it, which is highly unlikely, don't put it in there. Now, do I do that? I do it all the time because I don't think that OpenAI could care less about what I'm doing research on. And I also find it really valuable, like to help from an editing perspective on if I'm doing transitions or my voice. But that has to be like, I am not advocating for that. That has to be a personal like decision. So if it is, and also if it is something that I am working on with co-authors, I never ever do that unless everybody on the authorship team is okay with it, right? Like everybody is doing that. And so we've decided we are fine with that. I've gotten around that now because we have kind of a protected environment now that we build off of. So that's not an issue for me. I don't really use the interfaces like you're seeing with ChatGPT. But if it is something that you are concerned about getting out into the world, then don't put it in there. That's just the rule of thumb. Not a question, just a comment. Another suggestion will be AI Fiesto, where you can use 6 AI platforms together. Just thought of sharing this if you're in. Oh yeah, so that I've actually heard of this. I've not used it a whole lot. So that's I can't speak to how well it functions, but I have heard really good things about it. Also, another really good one is Manus AI. It's actually what we created the website with, so you can actually develop slides or educational materials out of just putting a bunch of stuff in it. And then like you can be like, oh, I developed this whole ASCII station and whatever. By the way, make a website out of it, and it'll do that. I mean, it's pretty impressive. So that one's really good as well. All right, let's see. Do we have any others before we go on? I was wondering how effective these templates are for didactic courses. Have you explored yet? So we mostly have used this in the realm of generating Q&A questions for assessments. We've used it for curriculum mapping, really good use case, does a great job. We've used it for generating, clinical scenarios and giving formative feedback. And what we have seen, and I'm not sure that this directly answers your question, is we look at usage data. So learners, we know, and I think this is probably a safe assumption, but forgive me if it's not, spend a lot of like money on resources externally, at least in medical education, to prep for things like boards and stuff for that. And so because they have so many competing priorities, they're trying to figure out what is the highest yield. And so when we started making these available to them at no charge, we could actually monitor the usage of the different tools, and we would see like right before certain exams these high spikes in usages because they were using it a lot, right? And so I think that it is an opportunity for exploration. I'm not exactly sure. There's a lot of studies that say this is how it was done for didactics yet. But I think that is an excellent opportunity for you all to go and explore that. I see that Dawn popped on. Am I out of time?
Yes, so I thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, but we have reached our time, and we would like to make sure that our other panelists have a time to share their experience with AI. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Moy.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Turner. There's so much info there, and you definitely show your passion and your wisdom in how to use AI. So thank you so much. So we were going to share, let me just move our slides a little bit here and get to, let's skip our pop-up question, but maybe we'll ask it another time. And this is a very popular topic, so maybe we could do another AI in the spring. So let me just introduce Dr. Nadarajah. He has pulled together a panel of faculty who have learned ways to utilize AI to assist with teaching both the art and the science of optometric practice. So I'll just turn it over to you now, Dr. Nadarajah.
Cool. Okay, so thanks, Dr. Moy. So it's my pleasure to introduce some of the champions of AI from our very own schools today. If you do have any questions, please enter them into the chat as the panelists do share, and they'll either answer virtually or live during the Q&A session after their presentations. So let me go ahead and introduce our lovely presenters. So first off, we have Dr. Clint Prestwich, who received his Bachelor of Science degree in neuroscience from Brigham Young University and his Doctor of Optometry degree from the Southern College of Optometry. He completed his residency training in pediatric optometry and vision therapy at the Southern California College of Optometry and is now on the faculty at Chicago College of Optometry, Midwestern University. Dr. Prestwich is passionate about optometric education, is currently enrolled in the Master of Health Professions Education program at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Secondly, we have Dr. Tina Esposito. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in General Biology from the University of Arizona in Tucson and went on to earn her Doctor of Optometry degree from the Midwestern University in Arizona. And Dr. Esposito then completed her postdoctoral residency in vision therapy and rehabilitation at the Southern College of Optometry in Memphis, Tennessee. She is now faculty at the Arizona College of Optometry and sees patients in the acquired brain injury and rehabilitation clinics. Dr. Esposito also serves as the clinical care lead for the Pediatric and Vision Therapy Department and Director of Student Achievement. And then lastly, we have Dr. Tim Bossie. He received his Bachelor of Science in Biology at the University of Maine and graduated with his Doctor of Optometry from the New England College of Optometry. He is currently the Senior Director of Owned Clinics and Outreach Services and an Assistant Professor of Clinical Optometry and at NECO. And then he oversees NECO's Center for Eye Care, Commonwealth, and Roslindale, and NECO's outreach clinics. Before serving in this role, Dr. Bossie was the clinical and residency director at Lynn Community Health Center in Lynn, Massachusetts. And outside of his clinical practice, Dr. Bossie also lectures at NECO on glaucoma. So we can see these esteemed individuals. Thank you, Dr. Prestwich, Esposito, and Bossie for sharing your experiences. So first up, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Prestwich.
Hi, everyone. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to talk to you briefly. I was asked to just share a quick example of how I use AI in clinical education. So, in the interest of time, I'm gonna go through this rather quickly. But in optometry, we all know that there's been a shift in the last couple of years from procedural learning to trying to really assess and focus on teaching communication skills and critical thinking. And those things can be difficult to teach. And so AI can be a really useful tool to meet that challenge of teaching, especially communication and clinical decision making. So something I've been involved with pretty heavily is informal teaching and assessment, and that's the utilization of a third-party program. It's called SimConverse. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of what that is, but it allows us to build characters and formal rubrics that allows then our students to speak to an AI character, and they respond as that character would respond, and they're able to then be graded on that encounter. It's been a very useful tool for us in training our students and helping them to improve. Now, the downside of SimConverse is that it is a third-party program, so you have to pay for it. It's a subscription, and there's credits you have to purchase and things like that. So it's not readily accessible to everybody. But you can do similar things to try to teach communication abilities to our students, even just using these large language model AI platforms. Now, I wanted to preface what I'm going to show you, because I'm going to show you a quick example of how this can be used to teach delivering a patient education. And I was aiming for entry level. So Dr. Turner just gave us a wonderful example of how to design really excellent prompts and using the best AI models. And I used the garbage one, Copilot, that she called. And it's not the best, but I wanted to pick something that a lot of us have access to, and something that we don't have to pay for if you work in a Microsoft environment. So I want to show you something that was really basic. Also, I'm going to show you this prompt. This prompt is very, very basic. It looks nothing like what Dr. Turner just showed us how to build. And it actually was by design. I wanted to show you that with something that's pretty rough, you can actually get some results that are usable. So the scenario that I'm setting up is that if you're a student, you can give this prompt to a student and they can practice delivering patient education to this AI. So I told the AI to act like a 55-year-old patient that is a little abrasive and unwilling to listen. They have proliferative diabetic retinopathy. They're scared about that. And then I gave the AI this idea that I want you to grade me on my performance. And I want you to grade me on a scale of 1 to 4, focusing on things like effective communication, professionalism, and accuracy of the statement, of what I said about the diagnosis and the cause and the treatment plan. So this is what happened in this example. So the patient, they start this role play, and obviously she's a little abrasive. The AI model is abrasive, I should say, and they're scared about what's going on. And so I give a quick response. Now, I will say in these responses, I am dictating to Copilot. It has that functionality, and I'm trying to do that to make it as real as possible. So I say we have some treatments available for this, and then again, I get a response that's, again, it's a little abrasive. What are you going to do about this? From there, I give a very long, rambling, not great response about how to fix diabetic retinopathy. And at the conclusion of that, Copilot can then generate a score, and they grade me on my performance. And you can see that in this example, it gave me a score in the 3 areas that I asked it to. It gave me a score for effective communication, for professionalism, and then accuracy of the diagnosis, cause, and treatment plan. Some things I think maybe of note, on the treatment plan, I talked about anti-VEGF injections in my recommendation, and it said, oh, you could have also mentioned laser. Also, in my effective communication, it says like it was a little bit rambling and you should have organized it better, and which is absolutely true. It was definitely rambling. I was kind of off the cuff just talking about it briefly, and it gave me some of that feedback. So this is just a really quick example of something that we can do to help train our students in this way. So the way I envision this can work. Maybe if you have some downtime in the clinic and you have an opportunity to work through some of these with your students there. So you're watching them, they're getting some of this feedback, and you can talk to them through what this looks like. Or maybe you watched a student who crashed and burned in a patient education, or maybe taking a case history, and you want to give them maybe a brief assignment, a casual assignment that's formative that they can work on at home. So you say, hey, I'm going to give you these prompts. I want you to plug this into ChatGPT while you're over, over the next week, and then we'll go over your responses and how it graded you and send them to me or something like that, so you can make sure that there's no failure points there. So again, just a quick example of what things can look like if you use this in active teaching. I'll turn the time now to Dr. Esposito.
Dr. Esposito, you're still muted.
Yeah, can you believe that? How many years have we been doing this?
It's Monday.
So, my passion kind of lies in optometric education and constantly finding ways to bridge the classroom into the clinic. While our students kind of see the classroom as a labor of love, kind of just to essentially study to pass the next exam, for some reason, when they're in clinic, the learning just blossoms because it's what they're going to do every day and it's pretty practical. So the way that I have kind of used AI to support clinical education and making that bridge happen is something that's called adaptive quizzing. So adaptive quizzing essentially is going to be able to create a knowledge base that builds progressively on itself. So it starts off with some basic recall, then builds to application, and then builds to analysis. And then essentially what you're trying to do is you're guiding questions when incorrect. So if they get it right, then it keeps building in this scaffolding method. But if it gets it wrong, then it allows an opportunity to provide some guiding developmental questions so that they can think through the aspects of what was right and what was wrong and kind of put them in this Goldilocks zone of proximal development. So using AI, it's going to help analyze the student responses. It's going to provide some immediate feedback, which is some of the most important key points here, and it's going to shape behavior. But ultimately, the hope is to reinforce a mastery of key optometric concepts too. And where this adaptive concepts, this quizzing is really helpful is its impact in the optometric clinic with the work of the preceptor or you as you are in the space with the student. So this could be used to improve clinical reasoning. It could help link the didactic knowledge to those real patient encounters. And more importantly, it promotes reflection in action. So real-time conversations of if you are in clinic and let's say you have a student who just had a case that maybe they struggled with being able to figure out what the next step is. You can use AI to help provide you with some of these questions as a diagnostic compass and really a teaching scaffold to meet them where they're at and then help them grow. So an example of what this would look like is now after Dr. Turner's presentation, using some of I was playing around with this as my prompt to take my prompt and put it into her software, which branches the logic a lot better. But the way that this works is you would essentially pick a patient case, maybe a diagnosis that patient needs help with, and it generates a series of 5 adaptive quiz questions. So you have it start with an earlier recall, and then you have it increase difficulty into that application and analysis. If you have some pictures or photos, you can also integrate this into the software so that they have some image feedback to give. So you would give them the question, the student would answer, and then you guys would work together so that once they give the question, and the answer, if the answer is right, it scales to something more challenging and gives you some confidence in terms of what that looks like, of how to get the next question or how to probe them for the next question. But if it's incorrect, it provides some feedback to maybe start getting them to think about it without giving them the answer just yet. And if they get it wrong again, then it provides you a series of guiding questions and giving them some more information that's the area of optometry or the area of clinical judgment that they have to dig into a little bit further. So really, this is just a way for us to help identify gaps, really meet the students at where they're at, and keep learners engaged in an active, kind of self-directed environment. It's low stakes, and it's just an opportunity for us to really kind of keep things moving. This is done in ChatGPT, but it could be done in some of these other softwares that Dr. Turner was talking about earlier. Copilot was not the greatest when kind of playing around with this to see which one was the best. However, utilizing some of the software, if you do the prompt a little bit more specific, I'll tell you the guiding reflection questions are even better than the ones that are presented with this prompt that I gave you today. So I know that was a pretty quick overview of how to use AI, but AI and adaptive quizzing in the clinic could hopefully help you and your students, not just again meet them where they're at, but also help you work together to constantly keep progressively moving their education forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bossie.
Thank you, Dr. Esposito. Happy to be here with all of you today. Very short amount of time, so in my slides, I probably put a little bit too much information, but so I'm here to kind of talk a little bit about AI and where we are with starting to involve AI in fundus imaging and patient care. So just an introduction slide. We know that retinal imaging has been used for a long time, very powerful diagnostic tool. I think what we're seeing right now, and Dr. Turner talked about this earlier, is that there's a lot of research being done in terms of models and that they're advancing very quickly. But the buy-in and the use of AI in terms of active patient care has been relatively low. But as we continue to train these models and have millions of fundus images, especially where we are in optometry, I think we're going to continue to see the push towards involving it, at least for a screening process. Retinal biomarkers really is the big other area right now of focus and how we can use biomarkers from fundus imaging to detect or identify various diseases. So diabetic retinopathy, which we know well, glaucoma, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, and also mental health now is another biomarker that's being looked at, but a long way to go in terms of making sure that we're where we need to be with relating those biomarkers to an actual diagnosis using AI. And I think you'll hear this term a lot. I've been hearing it a lot recently in some of my meetings, and that's oculomics. And it's using the eye, especially fundus imaging and these biomarkers, as a window to a patient's systemic health. So we've used AI in different ways, but now we're looking towards how, again, to use it in patient care. And we're really early on, and this slide is loaded for the a minute I have, but I think what's coming up is that there's a lot of things that educators need to know in terms of where we're going to be going with educating, and there's a lot that students are going to need to know from us educators. And I think my goal here really was to point out some of the thoughts that I've had as we've started to move through. And that's, understanding what tools you're going to use for devices themselves, whether it's manual or autonomous, whether you're using an image management system, whether you're getting an actual risk score or a diagnosis, evaluating the AI model that you're going to be using. So there's very few that are actually FDA approved right now for us to use. They're really only, again, focused on screenings. But it's always very important to understand, the size of the model that was trained and validated and the patient population that you have. And as you kind of work through it, you're going to see that there's different biases, there's different legal issues that we're going to have to work through. But again, I think looking at all of these things as an educator will obviously be important. And I can see we're getting even closer here. So my other slide, lots of information again, but as we prepare future optometrists, it's really going to be about our core clinical, foundations that we already teach, and that's how to integrate this information from AI and fundus imaging or AI and diagnostics, how to integrate that into the care that they're delivering, right? Using it as a support tool and not just an answer, right? How to critically think. So if you have an image from a fundus camera that's ungradable, what are next steps for that patient? So they're still going to have to work through those processes. And then again, the ethics and bias. The models are really trained on certain populations, and this is when I look through a lot of the literature, especially in fundus imaging, it's a major challenge that they're still trying to overcome. Light fundus, dark fundus, and it not fitting the patient that's actually sitting in your chair. And then how do we communicate some of this information, especially if it's being, driven by AI to our patient in a manner that allows them to know that we're having a thought process moving through it in terms of their management and plan. And then lastly, I do think that there's going to be a big opportunity for us as optometrists and educators to really use AI, especially oculomics, to elevate our profession, especially with interdisciplinary care. and also just to help in terms of patient access, as we know patient access for eye care is going to be a major challenge in the future. So sorry that was so quick. Happy to come back at another point to kind of share more of our experiences as we start to integrate this.
So thanks everyone. Thanks again for your rapid fire experiences. If you do have further questions for any of the panelists, their contact information is listed here, but I'll give it over to Dr. Moy now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our amazing panelists. We are all learning together about AI, and your presentations have been a great start in helping ASCO's institutions to harness the power of AI in clinical ed. It's clear we need more time on this, and thank you for our panelists for their patience and flexibility, and our speaker, and we welcome your suggestions for future OCEF topics. I'm just going to show a thank you slide to all of our speakers. Thank you for your willingness and your expertise. And please keep an eye out for an email with the SurveyMonkey link, and take a few minutes to provide us with some feedback about today's program. Thank you so much for attending OCEF 2025. Thank you to our moderators, our planning committee, and the ASCO staff. Hope everyone has a great week.